I'm Carla Reeves, and this is Differently. Whether you feel stuck in survival, navigating a change, or seeking more for your life, may this podcast be your weekly nudge to take a risk, to build a life that is uniquely bold, authentic, and in alignment with your deepest values. After a decade of coaching individuals from corporate leaders to creative artists to multi-million-dollar CEOs, I'm convinced we are far closer than we realize to what we deeply desire, and it's a willingness to do differently that can change everything. Could you use a little push to get out of your comfort zone today? Well, you are in luck. I know this is something I need on a regular basis. Get ready to listen in and see how my guest today allowed her drive to achieve lead the way to what she loves doing today. When her world wasn't challenging her anymore, she did differently, and you can too. Tina Larsson joins me today to share her story of how seeking something bigger led her from a farm in Sweden to New York City. Tina Larsson is the force behind the Folson Group, New York's premier co-op and condo consultant. She's also the author of Living the High Life. She is on a mission to make New York City safer, more sustainable, and more affordable, one building at a time. What stands out to me in this conversation is her relentless pursuit to do what lights her up, her willingness to push her edges and to think and do differently. Listen all the way through for a book that changed her life and some great ideas to shift your thinking about walking into a room of strangers and how networking has become a lifestyle. Here's to pushing our edges and knowing when it's time to get uncomfortable for the sake of something much bigger. Hey, Tina, welcome to Differently.
Thank you so much for having me, Carla. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm excited to have you here. So for people listening, Tina and I met through ShiftCo, which is an virtual and in-person platform of training and incredible mentoring and coaching for conscious and purpose-driven entrepreneurs. And I know it's been incredibly instrumental in my business, and I know you have shared the same. And so shout out to Terry Maxwell and ShiftCo, because we wouldn't have met if it weren't for that.
I know.
Tell us, say hello and tell us a little bit about who you are, Tina.
Okay, so I am Tina Larsson. I'm the co-founder of the Folson Group. We consult co-op and condo boards on operating more efficiently and more consciously, and which is one of the reasons why I was attracted to ShiftCo, which is where we met. I have an accent, you might notice, and it is from Sweden. So I grew up on a farm in Sweden. But that was not big enough for me. So I needed to move to something bigger and better and more exciting. So I moved to New York City in 1994, a long time ago.
So, by the way, my maiden name is Anderson, and I have a little Swedish in me.
Ooh, maybe we're cousins. You know, in Sweden, everybody's Larssons or Andersons or Johnsons or Svenssons or Nilssons.
I love that. So give us a little sense of what it was like to grow up on a farm in Sweden.
It was wonderful. It was really a wonderful experience. My parents, and how it all came about is because I started horseback riding and we lived in a suburb. My parents had just bought a house. We lived in a suburb, and I started horseback riding. And one day I said to my parents, I said, "Oh, I want my own horse," like a spoiled brat. And, I didn't think I was going to get my own horse. And what happened was that there was in the Sunday newspaper, my father read an ad, and the church was selling off some of their land and farms. So we went to this Sunday afternoon, we went to this open house, and it was a dilapidated farm in the middle of nowhere. but it had a lot of acreage. And the acreage was rented out to the farmer next door. So my father, he put in an offer, I think that it was $4,000. And a few weeks later, they called him and said, you won the auction.
And that was the beginning of life on the farm. So what was a typical day?
Yeah, but my parents, they already had full-time jobs. My mom was a CPA and my dad had a successful bakery firm. So they weren't going to work on a farm. So we just had a farmhouse with all of this land that was rented out to the farmer next door. And that was already on a lease agreement. So we just lived on a farm. Yeah.
But you grew up with a lot of space around you. And what impact did that have on you and your life today?
I think a lot. So one of the things is that this was early on in my parents' career. And my sister and I, we were at the time 7 and 9. So they didn't have any money. I mean, we were dirt poor. And we had this dilapidated farm that my father, he had to roll up his sleeves and say, listen, we can't renovate. We can't afford to renovate this. So one of the things and he's a baker, doesn't know anything about construction. So we had to do this as cheaply. We had to do the renovation as cheaply as we could and to make it work. So we actually we reused, which has really helped me in my whole reusage kind of thing that I'm very into, and I have been my entire life. We took the wood from the barn and we pulled out all the nails and we reused it inside of the house to renovate the house.
Wow. That is so fascinating.
My dad, he did it himself. I mean, with friends and family and his network
Wow. So growing up there, was it, did you grow up kind of in a calm environment, or like, were you alone a lot? Was it you and your sister a lot? Like, what did that dynamic, look like for you?
So I was always a bit of a loner. So we had our horses, and then and as we were there, as the years passed by, we had more and more animals. So we had cats and dogs and horses. Initially there were ponies, but then we got bigger. So then it was horses, and we had cows and pigs and geese and you name it, we had it.
I love it.
But I was a little bit of a loner, I would say, because I was with my horse. I spent a lot of hours every day I became somewhat successful at horseback riding and equestrian and competing and stuff. But yeah, most of my time I spent with my horses.
I'm always fascinated by, our childhood, and I always feel like there's threads and clues to what we are doing today often, or if we're trying to figure out what it is that we want to do, I always feel like there's clues if we go back and look at what we love to do and what we got lost doing when we were little. So you had said like you had this sense of wanting something bigger. When did that start, and what did that feel like as a young girl?
If I felt like it when I was a young girl, but I was always so when I was horseback riding, I got to a certain level and then I said to myself, I don't think that I can get any better. I'm at the height. This is the best that I'm ever going to be. So I stopped doing it. And when we were teenagers, my parents took us skiing. And then when I was old enough, I started going skiing by myself in the Alps primarily. And I skied, and I was a little bit of a ski bum because I stayed for the winter as opposed to go home after a week. And then I spent an entire winter season in Breckenridge and one entire year in Aspen. And during my year in Aspen in 1991, I was pro skiing for money every Friday. And at some point I went like, you know what? I'm never going to get any better than this. So I gave it up. So I always been like, once I feel like I can't get any better, then what's the purpose? I mean, I could go for being an Olympia, but I was too old for that.
Do you relate to being a hyperachiever?
Yes, I think I do. I do.
Yeah. So tell us more about that bigger and what that led to, that desire for something bigger.
Yeah. Well, it led to that I moved to New York. I mean, what can be bigger and better, right? So I moved to New York. When I got here, I was in the hospitality industry. So I was working in restaurants and stuff. I worked for the Sheraton at the time in Europe, and they sent me to the Middle East. I lived in Cairo and was the first female management trainee in the Cairo Sheraton.
Wow.
And and then I applied to go. I think that's when it was planted a seed in me. I applied when I was in Cairo. I applied to work at the St. Regis in New York. They had a position. They reached out to me. They actually flew me from Cairo to Brussels, I think, and they flew in from New York to Brussels to interview me. And then I ended up not getting it. And I think that the guy that interviewed me, he said that he and I didn't really connect on a personal level. But I think that that's really what planted a seed. And I went like, you know what? I should move. I should just pick up and move to New York.
And so how much longer after that did you actually move?
I worked for a cruise ship in between, so probably 2 years. Yeah, so 92 to 94. Yeah, 2 years later. And I moved here. And I worked in restaurants. And I realized that in New York, I really need to have a degree. So I went back to college when I was 29. I took my undergrad, started working on Wall Street as an intern. And my mentor on Wall Street, he said, you know, since you're in school anyways, you should take your MBA. So I took my MBA. I worked there for 10 years, started my own firm. I was a business analyst on Wall Street and an investment advisor. And I analyzed data and numbers. And when I was in school, I had a professor, someone, you know how things come about. One of my professors, my statistics professor, he said, you know, you're really exceptionally good at statistics. He said, you should really think about a career in statistics. Interesting. And then I went like, someone tells me I'm excellent at statistics. Why not explore that?
Let's go for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell us, how did you get from that to where you are today?
So I was thinking differently.
Yeah. Because you were thinking differently.
I was thinking differently. So I had this Wall Street job, and you can only imagine how many financial advisors there are in New York. On every corner. Well, now they're all real estate brokers, but back then they were all financial advisors. So we had bought a co-op, co-op is a community living where you own your apartment. And I know that in most parts of the country, they're called condos, but in New York, majority of them are co-ops, and we have some condos also. And we had bought our apartment. We bought it in 2004. And by 2010, all of a sudden I started paying attention. I hadn't really paid attention because I didn't really get it. And they increased the maintenance, which is our monthly fees, by 5% for the 10th year in a row. So even previously, I went back to the numbers, and it was 10 years in a row, 5% per year. So we started like asking, where does this go? And they say, oh, it's a nonprofit. It's supposed to just pay for the operations of running the building. But there was no inflation. So why were all the costs of running a building increasing by 5% if there's no inflation? So we spoke with our neighbors and they all felt the same way. So we held a coup. We all got together and we were a group of us and we took over the board. Turns out that when we were doing that in that whole process, that we realized that my husband is much more diplomatic than I am. So he's on the board. I'm not. You can only be for one from one each apartment. But when they, as a group, got voted in, they asked me if I could find some savings. So I did what I know from Wall Street. I went out, pretended to be a buyer, and got the financial statements from other buildings so that I had enough data, back to the statistics, to compare numbers, because I didn't know if $10,000 for service X for marble polishing was high, low, or even normal. And once we had enough data, we made some phone calls, eliminated some duplicate services, renegotiated some fees with vendors. And in the first 3 years, we were able to save our building $340,000.
Wow.
And that's when I said to my husband, we need to do something about this. We need to start a business. And that's what we did. And it turns out that nobody does what we do. Nobody else does this. Isn't that interesting?
It is fascinating. So how long have you had your business?
So we've had it since 2014. So it's going to be 9 years this year. But in the beginning, we still had our finance business. So it was basically a side hustle. And in 2019, but we were always networking and talking about it. And in 2019, it really started attracting a lot of new customers, and it started taking off. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about like your own personal journey in all of this. Like what have been the challenges? What have been the hurdles for you personally? I mean, you've been in some pretty big positions. You've traveled, you've been in other countries. What have been some of the things that you've had to face personally, and what is your why in all of this?
So my why is that I do not accept status quo. And I think that most things could be done better. My husband and I would joke. We go to a restaurant, and we're like, "Why are they doing it this way? This could have been done better." And he had a side tour of being an actor, which means that he was a bartender. So we both worked in the hospitality industry.
Love that. I grew up in the restaurant business. So when we're in a restaurant, I've got an eye out for that kind of stuff too. It drives our son crazy. He's like, "You guys are always complaining," but it's not really complaining. It's just noticing, and you have a certain level of service that you expect being in that industry. Yeah.
But so there are a few different occurrences that happened that led me to who I am as a person right now, I think. One of them was the financial crisis that completely devastated us. And that led to the fintech industry that took over and depressed the fees that you could charge as an asset manager or as a financial advisor. But that led me to needing to network. And so first of all, the financial service or financial crisis was a very humbling experience. All of a sudden, I started meditating. I started breathing in and out, which I apparently had never done before. I had never taken a break before. And
what caused you to do that? Like, I know there was a financial crisis, but what happened to you personally in that led you to?
personally, I mean, just like everybody else, we lost a lot of money. And I was seeking out, what do we do next? We started thinking about, what do we do next? How do we manage this? How do we do this on a personal level, on a business level? I mean, we might, all of us, we might lose everything, right? I mean, it was going downhill so fast that who knew where it was going to go? And so I started seeking out, like, how to be a better person, how to calm down, how to meditate, how to incorporate certain things. All of a sudden, when I went to the grocery store, when I took the longest line, I started breathing in and breathing out. And I had never done that before. I had yelled at them for taking too long. I mean, that's who I was as a person before. And it just really humbled me.
Mm-hmm.
And
wow.
Yeah. And then that led to me starting to have to network. People said, oh, you have to network. I was so uncomfortable walking into a room full of strangers. I mean, that was not an easy thing for me to overcome. And it was all mindset. I mean, I walked into a room full of what I saw it as at the time, strangers. And not until I realized, well, these might be my future friends.
I love that. What a powerful shift, right? And just you change your thinking, and all of a sudden what you do in that room, something else becomes available. I think you mentioned that there was a book that really inspired you during that time.
Yes, during that. So when I started networking, I went to an entrepreneur panel event. And I was still in the stage where I couldn't really figure out how to network. So I was sitting there all by myself, and I was waiting for someone to say hello to me, and I was not very social. And
we've all felt that way. We've all felt that way. I know I have, and I'm sure people listening, it's really awkward and uncomfortable. Yes. Okay, keep going.
I know. Yeah. And one of the panelists, a very successful entrepreneur, he's like, he owns some of the celebrity restaurants in New York. And he said what really helped him, and he highly recommended, was to read Never Eat Alone. So I read it, and I said to my husband, I said, listen, we come home, we eat dinner alone. I mean, two of us. And then we watch TV. I said, this is ridiculous. So we started doing things every night, and we always do. And now it's very rare that we eat alone.
Wow. So what does that look like? Just getting together with people that you know, your friends, does it matter? Do you have a rhyme or reason to it?
There's a rhyme and reason. So number one, we joined a social club. So that's like, for all of you who don't live in New York, that's like a yacht club or a golf club or a tennis club. It's a club. But in the city, it's we don't have yachts and tennis and etc. So it's a social club. There's a lot of events, and there are like 800 active members, I think. And we go to events all the time. My husband is the official member, so he is on a lot of committees and stuff. I'm not, because I'm just the extra member, but I'm still very involved. And yeah, so we very often go to events with 250 of our closest friends. So that's one. I belong to a BNI group, a very large one with like 80 members for 7 years. But I just recently switched to a different networking group that's called Executive Association of New York City, where we're about 70 members that are highly successful business owners. And so I do a lot of networking there. I do some random networking also. My husband he belongs to other networking groups, and then sometimes I visit him, his, and he visits mine. So we all know the entire network, but we belong to different networking groups. And then we have friends.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to go from these are all strangers to these are future friends? And what did that transition look like? Like for people listening who are on that side of these are all strangers and I hate networking, how do we move from that space to the other space you describe of like these are potential friends, opportunities, connections?
Yeah, so that is, I mean, it's just practice. It's like anything else. But one of the things that I just found out last year, so my LinkedIn coach, he wrote, and he had exactly the same experience or very similar experience. He wrote a networking book that is the best networking book I have ever read. And I wish that I had in 2010 when I started networking. And his name, and it's on Amazon, so I'm going to prop it here. So his name is Joe Apfelbaum, and the book is called High Energy Networking. And it's really a very good book that provides strategies, how to do it, how to best do it, etc. And it's an amazing book.
I have met Joe. I
You
years
have?
ago. I have, and his energy is off the charts. So
Yes.
that's really
It's
interesting.
contagious.
We'll link that in the show notes along with the Never Eat Alone. Okay, so keep going.
But I think that it probably took me a year of discomfort before I started feeling more comfortable. And I think that in the beginning, I hated it so much, and I had a pit in my stomach every time that I kind of hesitated to do it. And not not practicing makes it harder. And then finally, I joined the BNI group, and we met every single week. I'm sure
I've
that
done
a lot of you have
BNI.
heard of
Yeah.
BNI 7 a.m. But you do it every single week. Eventually, it just changes. And there's so much education. So BNI is a very good place to start. I highly recommend it to anyone starting networking because you do it every single week. They keep you accountable. You don't show up, you get they don't like that.
Well, and you have to introduce yourself every single week. You have to really master learning to say who you are and what you do and how you help people. And that was an incredible practice for me. I did BNI for a year, and it was that exactly the practice of doing it. So what are like maybe 1, 2, or 3 of your favorite kind of tips that you've learned that people could kind of put into action around making this a little more comfortable?
Do it consistently. Understanding that networking is to build relationship. It's not to hand out business cards.
Love that.
And then following up. I mean, the going into a room full of 80 people or whatever. And I networked twice yesterday. I saw Joe Apfelbaum both times. So I networked with 160 people yesterday. Did I meet them all? No, but I was seen. They all saw me, and I just happened to be the tallest woman in the room, which is kind of convenient for me. Nobody missed me. And Joe is the biggest energy in the whole room. So I so out of 160 people, I'm not going to have a coffee or dinner or lunch with 160 people. But let's say 10 of them, I will follow up. I have already reached out to many of them on LinkedIn saying hello, good to see you yesterday and stuff. And that's how you build a relationship. That's how you become friends. You don't, and that's how you build trust. You don't do that from just showing up, having a quick talk, and then exchanging business cards. you build a relationship by sitting down, talking deeper, speaking, talking a little bit, going a little personal, learning about that. Oh, you like golf and he likes golf. Do you want to meet? Or, oh, you scuba dive too? I have a scuba diving license too. Or,
Yeah.
so it's not only business. I mean, I understand what you do for a living. I understand that you're a CPA, just like the other 50 CPAs that I have in my CRM. But I know a little bit more about you and your family, or going to barbecues. I went to a really cool barbecue with a CPA this summer.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. It sounds like it's become almost part of your lifestyle, right? Like it's a longer game. You've made it part of your lifestyle, it sounds like. And so tell us the impact that that has had. This book, Never Eat Alone, the lifestyle change you made. What's been the impact personally and professionally?
So it's made me a better person and more positive person. I have learned from so many positive people, so many energetic people, so many people who are highly successful. I spoke at one of the networking events yesterday. I spoke with someone who has the largest window installation company in New York. And we were chit-chatting, and I told him, I said, I'm thinking that I'm going to create a course, an online on-demand course. And he said, and then he said, you should market it through this organization that specializes in co-ops and condos. And when they have new board members, you should make them counter market it. And I'm like, that's genius. No wonder you're so successful. And I had not thought about it. Yeah, so it's exchanging ideas, seeing how others successful. And as you know, you're only as successful as the X amount of people you surround yourself with. And that the number, I think, can be, if it's 5, 10, or 20, but
Yes.
And
so important who you surround yourself with.
Absolutely. And I also, another thing from my childhood, my parents, they had friends, but they always said, and actually when I think about it, it was my mother. She always said that, why you're always working, you're always on the go, always doing all of these things. She said, when do you not work? And I'm like, that book, and Never Eat Alone, really said, it really emphasized that integrating work with your personal life, then you have more hours in the day, and then that's going to elevate your success.
And very and that's often really worked for you.
Yeah. And I mean, why shouldn't you be friends with your clients or with your center of influences? Or then you can invite them to events, to podcasts, share your ideas, share your network, introduce them to the right people. And so we don't really separate it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it really does. There's less division between a working life and your personal life. And I'm finding that even in my own life, like it's all becoming more and more of a blend. And we spend a lot of time at work. So why not enjoy it? Why not be around people that we enjoy being around that? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what are you most excited about or inspired about in this new year?
This new year, I have very lofty goals.
I'm not surprised.
So I'm going to throw out 2 of them here on your podcast in case anybody listens and wants to help me there. So one other thing is that I'm going to do a TED Talk. That's my plan this year. I'm working with a speaking coach, so I don't need any speaking coaches. I have a speaking coach. But she and I have already started talking about what the talk is going to be about. and then I'm going to start pitching it, and I'm going to start booking it, I guess, and then practicing. I also, as part of that, I want to be on 100 podcasts this year. So if anyone knows any podcasters who are looking for podcast guests, contact me.
She's your gal. I love that.
And other than that, I mean, for our clients, there's a new law in New York fining buildings, co-op and condo buildings, for not reducing their carbon emissions and getting rid of their fossil fuels. I am very passionate about a clean environment and recycling and reusing, etc., and doing our best, each and every one of us, to leave a legacy and leave a better planet. And that law has made a lot of co-op and condo boards really think about how much they're using, because if they don't fix it, if they don't reduce it by 80% by 2050, in 2030, they're going to start getting fines hundreds of thousands of dollars per building.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. They don't know how to fix this, but they're going to fine people, and every owner, all of those fines, even if they belong to the building, those are passed on to the owners. So 3 million New Yorkers live in co-ops and condos. 3 million New Yorkers live in a co-op or condo. 80% of those are estimated to get fined a lot of money starting in 2030.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a big mission. So tell us, where can everybody find out more about you and what you're doing?
They can find our website is thefolsongroup.com. That's THEFOLSON group.com. They can also find me on LinkedIn, where I am every day. And on LinkedIn, I post very often. I post useful tips and links to our blogs, etc., about co-op and condo living. I wrote a book called Living the High Life. It's available on Amazon, and it's a great little guidebook. I say little. It's a great guidebook for co-op and condo owners and their boards, and especially new buyers, first-time home buyers in New York who might be more interested and more want to get involved in sometimes what is their largest lifetime investment.
And lastly, and I'll put all those links in the show notes so that you can find them. And last but not least, what does differently mean to you?
Differently means not doing things the way it's always been done. Just because it's always been done in one way doesn't mean that that's the right way to do it. Or the most efficient way. It could be the right way, but it's not the most efficient way to do it. And with technology today, there's so many ways to do things different.
Beautiful. Thank you, Tina, for joining me. And I look forward to continuing our relationship. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a beautiful day, everyone. Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of Differently. I hope it stirred your thinking, and I invite you to take one inspired action from something that stood out to you. If you want to hear more conversations like this, be sure to hit follow on your favorite podcast app. And if this episode could impact someone you know, please help us spread the word and pass it along. Remember, new episodes drop weekly. See you next week.